The following is a special presentation of Tony Kurre Radio. Keep your mission on your mind and your mind on your mission. This is Mission Minded with Michael Coleman.
I love this time of the week. We get the chance to check out with Michael Coleman. He, of course, is the CEO of the Montgomery Food Bank, formerly the Jimmy Hill Mission. It's called Mission Minded. We always talk about keeping your mission on your mind, your mission. It runs every Monday through Friday, 10 a.m. right here on TKR on Tony Kurre Radio. Download that TKR app like tens of thousands of folks have already done. You can listen to the show whenever you want, or you can go to the Tony Kurre Radio Podcast Network. Just pull up TKR or Tony Kurre with a K, Kurre Radio Podcast. Wherever you get your podcast, you will find Mission Minded. Make sure you put Michael Coleman in there as well and find the show. Michael, how you been? What's going on down at the Montgomery Food Bank? All good?
It's incredibly busy. Unfortunately, the problem of food insecurity and challenges to distribute that to the people in need are always there. But we live in a blessed country where we have these resources to be able to do that. And I love doing the job and love connecting with people and helping them. So every day is a good day for me, brother.
You know what? And that's a wonderful thing, and that's why I love talking with you, because you just make me feel better just hearing your voice. When you talk about the supply chain, recently, I understand that Joe Biden met with the railroads. There evidently was going to be a strike. Does that stuff directly affect you?
Well, it can. I mean, we don't get stuff shipped in through rail, and we don't have like big grain shipments. But ultimately, I think I may have stated that 40 to 45% of our goods come from store donations.
Yeah.
So not only do we get stuff from the USDA, those commodities, but we get stuff from stores when they donate pallets of food and things like that. And so it all depends on how much overage a store can have, or depending on what the individual crops are from year to year. And so when you've got, if the rail stops and the food doesn't get, and the breads aren't made, and all the different foods that get made from all that, eventually it affects the supply chain. Absolutely. And so, and the more I'm in this, the more I see this. So we're always trying to find more and more ways to try to create different food sources to come into our network for us to ultimately distribute it down to those in need.
I hear you. And I think that's really interesting, because you do serve 35 counties, and so you're a huge piece of the great state of Alabama and how so many people are fed. Let me just ask you this. And for some reason, just recently, I've seen a couple of television shows, and they were actually comedy shows, and they were talking about one of the most important parts of America is our trash cans, because we throw away so much food. How do we compare to, well, let's start with the state. How does Alabama compare to other states when you look at it? And I know you love to collaborate, so I'm sure you've been to other states or other major cities to see how their food banks or Feeding America programs work. And then just talk briefly about how the United States compares to other countries, if you can.
Well, I tell you, it's, we're a throwaway society.
Yeah.
And we're so used to, if we don't like the way something tastes, or we don't necessarily prefer it, or it's not our favorite, we throw it away without the least little bit of concern. One of the things that I'm perhaps most proud of is the whole Feeding America network, which consists of 200 food banks and then over 60,000 food pantries across. We saved last year 4.7 billion pounds of food from unnecessarily going to landfills. The food is perfectly good. There's not a thing in the world wrong with it. We were able to save that and redistribute that out to meet the need. But still, one of the stats that was really alarming was coming out of COVID and during COVID that there was a 50% increase of people standing in a food line. And again, it's just so easy to form judgments, but so many of these people are people who've worked their entire life. And then a wife, let's say, husband's worked his whole life, or it could be vice versa. And the wife's taking care of him. The wife may not be in great health. And then all of a sudden he has a heart attack and he's retired, and maybe he doesn't have a pension, or maybe, they're down to living on what their Social Security is.
Yeah.
And sometimes when you're not expecting that or you're not prepared for that, I mean, you find yourself not being able to make ends meet. And so it's incredibly challenging from going to work every day and being self-sufficient, all of a sudden standing in line and asking somebody to help you put basic necessities on the table. And thankfully, we do have enough food right now overall, but we're still always refining the food that we get and trying to make sure that to eliminate as much waste as possible so that we can meet, because the demand continues to go up. And then you look at things like the inflationary struggles that we have. Imagine you're having trouble making ends meet, and now you're paying, of course, the gas is coming down, thankfully. But at one time, it got up to, close to $4.50 a gallon in Alabama, and that was relatively cheap compared to other places in the country. But, there were people being interviewed on TV that says, I had to get a part-time job just to pay for my gas to go to my real job.
Yeah.
And so these struggles are very real, and my heart just hurts for people who, these are not lazy people. These are people willing to do whatever it takes, but maybe they lack certain skills, or maybe they lack certain education, or maybe they lack certain support systems. There's all sorts of reasons why that happens. But the bottom line is they have kids to feed, or they have a senior parents to feed, or it just, the list goes on and on and on. And again, I'm thankful we live in a country who has this system set up, because I think we're the best at it in the world. Because when you look around the world, especially third world countries, you see people standing in food lines, and it's the norm rather than the exception. So I think we're very blessed, but I think we have some incredible challenges we're still trying to work through to help all of our citizens.
Michael Coleman is the CEO of the Montgomery Food Bank, formerly the Jimmy Hill Mission. He's worked in non-for-profits his entire life. He's been gracious enough to come on and do our show every single week, mission-minded, keeping your mind, your mission, your mind. You can hear the show every Monday through Friday, 10 a.m. Central Time, and, of course, wherever you get your podcast on the Tony Curry Radio Podcast Network. So check it out. info@TonyCurryRadio.net, info@TonyCurryRadio.net. You ready to knock out some email questions?
I'd love to.
Cleet here in Birmingham says that if someone wants to donate some food, but it's perishable, can they, and how do they go about doing that if they possibly can?
Yeah, that happens all the time, where you have just kind of, individual food drives. Like, you can go to our website and sign up for a food drive, and basically anybody can collect food. And probably what you mean by perishable is, it might be, it could be produce, and produce typically doesn't last very long. You have to move that very quick. But the bottom line is, anytime you go donate food at a food bank, regardless if it's 20 pounds of food or it's 2,000 pounds of food, it should get inspected. It's quality controlled. But yeah, that food can go into the system through as an individual donation. We have food drives all the time. And I tell you, in particular, Need, one of the things we're focused on right now is we have a senior supplement program to where once a month seniors get an additional box of food that's about 35 pounds. But we're trying to fill that box with things that lots of times are tough to come by in the system, because we're thinking about from a elderly person. So we're trying to get proteins like chicken and tuna and things like that can open up in a little pouch, easy tearaway pouch, rather than, a big block of ham that you have to cook in the oven. Yeah. We're trying to get rice bowls with meals that you could just warm up in the microwave rather than having to cook anything on a stove. And so we're trying to tailor our food drives around specific needs to build our senior supplement program back up again. So we're trying to be very strategic about that. But yeah, absolutely. We are very dependent on people doing food drives, and you can think about it like this. To do a food drive, you could do it with your office. You could do it with your church. You could do it with the people you play golf. It doesn't matter. Just whatever network that you have, you can come up and do a food drive and just ask them to participate, and then take that into your local food bank, and that should be accepted.
There you go. And I know with Thanksgiving coming up, it'll be here before I know. A lot of people like to do food drives around this time of the area, so that's a good stuff too. Mission Minded here on TKR and Tony Curry Radio here at 5 days a week, and of course on our podcast, info@tonycurryradio.net if you have email questions. Joe in Huntsville, and this is an interesting question because we actually got into this several shows back, but it's certainly warranted to read again. How do politics play into non-for-profits? What are the rules on contributions, et cetera? I know you had, when you were with the Jimmy Hill Mission, obviously you had to work really close to the mayor, and you had to work with city council. Now I know that's probably a little different with the Montgomery Food Bank, but how do you deal with that when it comes to politics?
Yeah, so first of all, we have just really kind of skirted around that. We talked about it. So I could probably take up the rest of the show talking about this, but it's very important. So I'll tell you my philosophy on it, and then I'll give you a couple of examples of where that's become problematic or challenging for me. So what I look at is, whatever I'm doing, like right now, I'm trying to distribute food, and somebody's political view, whether they are Democrat, whether they're Republican, whether Green Party, Libertarian, I could not care less. What I care about is getting food in the mouths of those who have need. And we need everybody as a part of that. So we have donors who are on the political left and we have donors who are on the political right. And I don't want to take a political position and alienate anybody. And it's not that that's because that's not our role. Now, if you were to sit down and have a conversation with me, of course I would have political thoughts and political ideas. But even today, and I'll tell you where I've really changed over the years, there are issues that I've learned about in the nonprofit world that, let's say, for instance, you could say, okay, I am somebody who is pro-life. Now, if I'm pro-life, that's not something that I need to make a part of my program unless I was on early pregnancy, unless my nonprofit was dealing with early pregnancy or fighting that issue. I mean, it's irrelevant ultimately what my personal view is on abortion when I'm running a food bank.
Sure.
But typically, if you're pro-life, you're going to be more politically aligned with Republicans. But then I look at issues like justice, and a lot of African American churches will focus on the issues of justice, and you don't see that in white churches. And I see, well, you know what? The Bible is saturated with talk of justice for the poor, and I see a lot of that being ignored. And so the African American population is more aligned with the Democratic Party. Not everybody. I'm not painting everybody with a broad brush, but I might care about pro-life, but I don't want to do it under a Republican banner because there's not everything about the Republican Party I embrace. I don't want to fight justice issues under the banner of Democratic Party because there's not everything about the Democratic Party that I embrace. So I'm to the point in my life that I want to step back and go, listen, here's the things that I'm passionate about. And if I'm fighting justice, and if I'm fighting against racism, and if I'm fighting against barriers to people in poverty and trying to lift them out of poverty, I'll fight those issues on those grounds. And over here, I might fight other issues, but I don't want to do it under the banner because it's almost like once I do it under the banner of a political party, I have to embrace everything that party stands for. And I've not found a political party that I agree with everything. So I've just to the point in my life where I say, this is what I'm passionate about. This is what I think is right. This is what I'm willing to fight for. But my personal views are not part of my my battle here at the nonprofit because, and this was the same at Jimmy Hill, because we have people who are just going to disagree with me. And here's the thing, and I'll give you a specific example. Wherever you draw the line on your view, there's going to be people on the other side of that line. Mm-hmm. And when you do that in the political climate that exists today, whoever is on the other side is now your adversary. You can't just be people anymore who disagree on an issue. You you're drawing a line. And so you've alienated donors who otherwise would support, and who suffers from that. I don't suffer from that. Who suffers from that are the people we're trying to help. And so I'm not gonna be so arrogant as to, number one, think I've got that all my opinions are correct, nor am I going to risk the health of those I'm trying to help because I needed to be more humble and just keep those opinions to myself.
That's a tough nut, though, isn't it? I mean, I see this a lot. I've seen schools, institutions, and obviously they need contributions from their boosters and their donors. And all of a sudden, that donor or the booster who has given a large portion of their money to that school all of a sudden has done something wrong. Maybe they're in trouble with the law, and all of a sudden they're like, I don't think we want your money anymore. But when you're talking about something like food, I mean, you have to look at it differently, do you not?
Yeah, I mean, and everybody is different. They may see this issue differently. There's not a one size fits all. Everybody just has to figure out for themselves where that line is. Let me give you a true story that happened. So when the protest came out, when Black Lives Matter, and that was a very delicate, sensitive issue. And so the issue came up that we needed from some of the people in my organization. They felt very strongly that we needed to take a position on Black Lives Matter. And so I said, well, tell me why you feel so strong about that. And we talked it through that, hey, from their perspective and their experience, what Black Lives Matter stood for resonated with them. Mm-hmm. And so I sat and I tried to listen. And then I boiled it down to this. I said, I can't solve racism in this world. What I can do, though, is fight against racism in this organization, because I'm, in essence, the CEO of this organization. And so let me tell you the effect. If I say we support Black Lives Matter, or if we I think at the time it was just putting a black emblem or something on your social media. Mm-hmm. If you did that, you've now alienated a minimum of a half of your donor base. Yeah. And so then I said, okay, so if we are a $6 million organization and we lose $3 million, which one of you is going to give up your job for that statement? Mm-hmm. Because we're going to have to close down part of this. And what's happened, it hasn't changed the conversation. It hasn't changed the dynamic, but it's hurt homeless people who we're trying to help. And so I wasn't saying I was for Black Lives Matter or against Black Lives Matter. I was saying from an organizational standpoint, we are not a political organization. We're here to help people. And I'm not going to allow it to become a political football for people on social media and potential donors to draw lines and ultimately hurt the organization and then the very people that we're trying to help.
That's a great story, because I think that you saw a lot of companies, corporate companies, and I can think of several, whether it be Delta or Atlanta Coca-Cola, that kind of felt like they needed to latch on to some of these movements, whether it be the LGBTQ plus community or Black Lives Matter, because they felt like if they did not, then it looked like they didn't support those groups. And I think you can do this democratically, if you will, by saying, hey, listen, it's not that we don't support that. It's just not an arena we need to be in. And certainly every business is different. And particularly when you're talking about a non-for-profit that feeds Americans, I could certainly see your viewpoint. info@TonyCurryRadio.net, info@TonyCurryRadio.net. Pam in Birmingham says, outside, obviously, after having a board and non-for-profit, what are some of the subtle differences between being a CEO of a non-for-profit and a CEO of a for-profit? Or are there any?
Yeah, I think so. You have probably a lot more similarities. And it goes back in part of the things I've talked about, that so often in the nonprofit world, you see a lot of leaders who have incredible hearts, but they simply don't know how to run a business. Mm-hmm. And so you'll come in and you're like, this doesn't make any sense. And you're just looking at it from a business standpoint and said, if you were dependent on customers, you would have closed a long time ago. because what you're not running it well, in other words. And so you nonprofit is no different. You have to run it well. You have to be responsible. But it's a little bit different. The key difference is what you're selling. So you might be selling a product. What nonprofits typically do are selling impact. We're here, and this is the problem we're attacking in society, and this is the impact that we're having on it. And it's an invitation to, you're not making an appeal based on somebody's need. Like, I'm not selling earbuds, is it earbuds, whatever it is. I'm not selling widgets. How about that? We just go with widgets.
There you go.
I'm not selling widgets that you need. I'm selling humanity. And the truth matter is there's lots of different people to get on board and support. And a lot of people support their church. They grew up, especially down here in the South. That's more common, that you're just taught to give. And so, and of course, you're not profit motivated by profit, so to speak, because profit doesn't go into your pocket like it does if you're a business owner. So lots of times you're motivated to get profit because maybe you can expand your business, maybe you can hire more people, maybe you can give people raises, and to some degree that's still the case. But because all money in nonprofits go back into the nonprofit, it doesn't benefit you personally like it would if you're a business owner. That's just some of the things just off the top of my head that are similar and different.
All right. He's Michael Coleman, mission miner. Of course, he's the CEO of the Montgomery Food Bank, formerly of the Jimmy Hill Mission. And we're taking your emails, info@TonyCurryRadio.net. Trey in Mobile wants to know, has Michael had to deal with any employees who didn't want to come back to the office post-COVID? And if they did, how did you handle it? Did you give your employees an option?
Wow. Well, we were coming out of COVID. We ended up not having a lot of employees working remotely alone. So we kind of, when it happened and I was at the mission, we collectively had to shut down, except for the fact we had people on site. So, we were caring for homeless people in addiction. So we had to have what we call minimum manning, for the safety of the organization, safety of our clients. But the rest of the people worked remotely. But we all came back together. And so nobody worked for a couple of years and then was forced to come back. But I know so many companies are forced to do that. And some of them, I think it was Facebook who said, and it could have been another social media, maybe it was Twitter, I'm not sure. But one of them said, hey, we're coming, you got to come back. And, if you don't like it, then go work somewhere else.
Yeah.
While I'm very pro employee in a lot of ways, I don't like the fact that employees, I don't like when the tail is wagging the dog. Mm-hmm. And I feel like sometimes that's how we get with employees, with the quiet quitting and stuff like that, is the employee feels like I've got the leverage. And so I'm not going to come, I'm going to let my own individual preference, override what's good for the group, what's good for the company. And I'm not, maybe they feel that way, but I also think it's within the rights of a company to say it's our expectation you come back to work. And I'm going to tell you, I do a lot of meetings through Zoom, and it doesn't bother me to have a meeting in Zoom, but I tell you, I want my employees, I want my directors right in front of me on a pretty regular basis that we're talking face to face and not everything's done through this distance. So it's really up to the business. If I were a business owner, I would try to find ways to create opportunities for employees, just because it broadens your employee pool. Yeah. You can use it as an incentive and everything else. But if an employer feels like that's not a good fit for them, then I think it's certainly within their rights to put that requirement back, and then that individual has a decision that they have to make.
I don't think the workforce is ever going to look the same again. I think I saw the number 30%. 30% of all companies have their employees back 5 days a week, which is crazy about this whole thing. Is there some businesses that won't allow their employees to come back to the office?
Yeah.
They've closed their office space because they're saving money. And so I think, you're going to have, I can think of the place just down by the Galleria Towers. It's empty. It's a beautiful tower. It is absolutely empty. And what's going to end up happening is they're going to have to rent that space a lot cheaper. And I think people end up getting back into their office space because I do think it's the right thing to do. But I do think there's a happy medium there where you can work maybe a day or two. I mean, we already talked about 4-day work weeks where you can maybe work a day from home. It's almost like a vacation day if you can take care of the kids or your pets or whatever and get some work done at the same time. I think that's probably a good thing.
I agree. Yep. I agree too that, if businesses, I just think it's smart for a business rather than get into this, do they have the right to do it? I think we all agree, yes, a business has the right to do it. The question is it smart for a business to do it? And in some cases it may be, and I will use the Blue Cross Blue Shield building in Birmingham. When I talked with them, they had over 3,000 employees in this one building. And then they were all, to include the CEO, when COVID hit, they were all working from home.
Yeah.
And one of the questions was, hey, that they're starting to say, well, wait a minute, if we can do everything from home, the question would be, why are we paying maintenance, utilities, air conditioning, everything for 3,000 offices or 3,000 workspaces or cubicles or whatever? That's more money if we don't lose productivity. Now, I don't know where they ended up on that. I just know they were wrestling with it at some time, and I think some have gone back. But like I said, every company has to make that decision. I think it's smart. It's just smart business to provide your employees as many options as possible.
No, and I think maybe Google had it right when they did their vast expansions of workspaces. You could bring your dog, and they had restaurants and all these things. And they said it was one of the most enjoyable places to work. People couldn't wait to get back to work. And that's one place where you really don't have to go there at all to make your work because it's all computerized stuff.
I would tell you back in the day, this is just real quick. I was stationed, this was in the 90s, early 90s. I was stationed in Lawton, Oklahoma. And at the time, I think it's still there. There was a Goodyear tire plant. And whenever they'd have 100 jobs come open, and they'd get like 5,000 applications because everybody wanted to work out there. And I was blown away. Again, this is 30 years ago, but I was blown away that they had their own ground out there. So Goodyear was so big, but they had their own doctor out there for people to go to the doctor. They had their own pharmacy out there. They had like a little shopette that you could go and get stuff, and everything was built on convenience to the employees. And now, again, that was 30 years ago. And I just remember how people were fighting to get a job out there. And once you got a job, it was rare that somebody left because of the benefits and just all those things. So they were a little ahead of their time there. And, but I love that kind of thinking where, hey, like you said, with the dog and the more things, I know sometimes they have childcare. I know of businesses now that allow you a half-hour nap. They have a quiet room where you can lean back in a recliner and take a 30-minute nap. There's all sorts of things being done out there, and hey, I love it. You
have nap time right after the show every Monday, don't you?
I'm thinking about employing that nap time. The older I get, the more I want to employ it.
Well, you have an open and closed door policy. If it's open, come on in. If it's closed, and Michael's taking a nap, and you deserve it. You deserve it too. Hey, Michael, great stuff. We got a couple more emails. We'll get them to him next week. We're up against it, man. Thank you so much for your time. Again, to tell people how they can help you out, your website and everything else, the Montgomery Food Bank.
Just go to MAFB, Montgomery Area Food Bank. It's just MAFB.org, and we've got a new website up, and we'd love to have you just come and just see what we're doing and reach out to our social media, Montgomery Area Food Bank, and just be a part of what we're doing and keep the questions coming. Boy, that makes me feel good. We have people out there listening. If there's anything I can say or do that might help you, that it makes it all worth it. Yeah, we'll start posting your show, Mission Minded, on your website, if that's cool with you. And we'll get that up so people can listen, and that should certainly get some more questions coming our way as well. Great stuff, Michael. Thank you. Fantastic. Thanks, brother.
This has been a special presentation of Tony Kurre Radio.